All right, BIP here from Bizarre Interest Productions, and we're gonna talk about are the Yu-Gi-Oh women as good as we remembered them to be? Now, this was posted about 2 days ago, and underneath it were a lot of very interesting opinions, including people who were like basically saying that the women have gone downhill at a certain points. Some people had said after 5Ds. Some people were saying as early as DM. Some people were saying that Blue Angel was the only good one or the last good one. And yeah, let's talk about that. So in terms of kid shonen, Yu-Gi-Oh isn't exactly the worst when it comes to female characters, but I wouldn't say they're at the top of the list. While many of them are pretty decent, I will say that while Yu-Gi-Oh is nowhere near the worst, like compared to Beyblade and Beat 'em On, Yu-Gi-Oh is a feminist anime. But Pokemon has far exceeded them in a lot of areas, and even Digimon, you could argue, has more better treated female characters than in Yu-Gi-Oh when it comes to the main leads. And this might be a hot take, but the last two might be better than people give them credit for, and they're only hating on it because the art style is just a little bit too different. So let's start with the first one, Taya or Anzu. Now the thing is, Taya is arguably the second worst out of all the Yu-Gi-Oh girl leads, but I don't entirely hate her or think she didn't have any merits. She was Yugi's first friend in the manga and anime series, who didn't hate him and was essentially his love interest for a time. She had her moment where she was being assaulted by some dudes and she fought back and got arrested, which led her getting into Def T and helping the heroes navigate through there. She always tried to lift everyone's spirits up, despite the fact that she got kidnapped a few times. It was her dueling against Mai that eventually got Mai to give Yugi some of her star chips so that both of them can enter the Duelist Kingdom finals. And in the anime, she was able to take on Crump, which was one of the big five members, and even though he was the least successful and that duel had a lot of sketchy tactics involved in it, she did earn herself the win, and technically she did win all three of her duels. The main problem with Taya slash Anzu is that because the anime and manga switched from being a character of the week study involving multiple different games to the card game exclusively, Taya's interesting attributes, like the fact that she wanted to become a dancer, didn't really get that much of a spotlight or focus on because you really can't interrupt the big plots between Merrick and Bakura for dancing. Even if you could have incorporated it, like her, using a custom to like avoid a bunch of monsters or something. Which is something people have pointed out capsule monsters could have done, but we'll talk about that another day. But Alexis is arguably even more wasted potential than Taya. Alexis is the queen of Obelisk Blue, but she barely gets any duels even in the first season where it would have made more sense for her to showcase her abilities. Like, she duels Jaden, and then she doesn't get another duel until about 38 episodes later against Titan. And part of the problem is, even though Titan is a decent win for her, the Shadow Riders had 7 antagonists, while Jaden was able to fight 5 out of the 7, and one of them was the possessed spirit of her brother, who she spent the whole season looking for. But instead of getting to fight him, she has to fight a glorified wrestler who got turned and was basically just Jaden's leftovers, now with a little bit of extra power. And while you could make the argument that she did manage to get her brother's memories back, in season 2 and 3, she practically does next to nothing. She gets a fun duel against her brother, she loses to Chaz and becomes a member of the Society of Light, and while she's brainwashed, she gets like one cute duel where she supports the guy who was dueling Jasmine and Mindy, only for her to end up losing to Jaden. And while that makes sense, again, you have to free the heroes by the end of the arc, but why couldn't her brother, the one who she was going to free her, actually enact a bit of a role reversal by him having to save her this arc? And then in season 3, like everyone else, she just gets sacrificed in the spirit dimension until the end of the series. Now, I will give season 4 credit in the fact that they gave her a goal and that she wanted to become a teacher at the end of the series, and she was still having lingering thoughts about how she felt towards Jaden at the end, and her coming to some sort of conclusion with that. But it really sucks that for like half of the show, she literally got nothing to do despite her being the queen of Obelisk and barely ever getting a chance to prove that title. Now, Akiza fared a lot better. She has one of the darkest storylines in Yu-Gi-Oh! in the sense that she eventually had psychic powers, but nearly burned her house, and her parents basically shipped her off to a boarding school where, without the emotional support she wanted from them, she kind of went rampant, ran away, and essentially ended up being manipulated into joining a cult by someone who groomed and abused her to essentially become a loyal general in their army. And part of this was her being tied into becoming one of the 5 legendary signers designed to eventually defeat the Dark Signers and stop the Earthbound Immortals. And while dual record isn't everything, the fact that she was able to show the dangers of her character and how much she needed to change and evolve, from the fact of when she was basically meeting Yusei, he was the first person to try to reach out to her in a friendly way, and even though he beat her, she still had those lingering thoughts that never let her to continue moving on her doubts until she confronted Misty and found out about the truth of the Arcadian movement, and the fact that even though she didn't kill Misty's brother, in some ways, had she had the mental aptitude to recognize what she was doing was wrong or being manipulated, she probably could have saved her brother and ended up preventing any more victims of the movements. And with Yusei's help distracting Divine and getting the information from her, she's able to help Misty get over the death of her brother and acknowledge her responsibility, while also making sure that she takes responsibility for her own actions and making sure she's a better influence by the time the Dark Signers are completely defeated. And she ultimately ends her character arc in the first 2 seasons on a high note. Now, there is an argument to be had with Season 3 because a lot of people had wished Divine wasn't in prison, and it basically came back to be the antagonist of Season 3, where Aki would get one final chance to lay her demons to rest and take him on personally. But you could make the argument that in Season 2, she was able to let go of those burdens and Divine had no more influence over her. That being said, part of the reason why people want this is because in Season 3 and especially Season 4, she got very little to do. Now, her duel with Trudge is actually pretty fun because we see her trying to get her license and prove that she could have a good turbo duel. Even if it's just her first time, we see her going on a date with Yusei as he tries to give her strategies and tips, and the rest of the gang going to support her when she eventually earns her win as a first turbo duelist is actually really fun and compelling to watch. But in Seasons 3 and 4, it was like they kept wasting opportunities to give her duels and more focus. Now, part of the reason for that may have been that her actress usually does a lot of live action roles, so she was most likely busy and the studio chose to write her out until they needed her for very big moments. But at the same time, I can think of at least 2 other scenarios she could have had in both seasons for duels. Like in Season 3, where we see her catching up to her schooling duties now that she's back, the teacher is pretty antagonistic towards her, and it was a good opportunity to show that she can duel a normal person without losing control or having to worry about hurting somebody. But instead, Yusei gets the duel. We end up learning that Sly wants Stardust Dragon, and that never goes anywhere. And then in Season 4, she only gets 1 turbo duel during the World Racing Grand Prix against Team Unicorn and loses. Now, I understand giving her a loss to show her how hard she has to grow, but they never gave her another opportunity to turbo duel in the entire tournament. And given that the next few duels were between both the New World and the other alternate counterparts to the Egyptian god cards in terms of Norse mythology, it really felt like they robbed her of an opportunity for her to grow and get more developments. And while the Arc Cradle duels are mostly a highlight, the fact that her rivalry with Sherry never even got a chance to blossom until then is a disappointment, even if her duel teaming up with Crow against her was pretty good for the most part. And Aki is the best of the girls up to this point, but when your main female character gets sidelined for half of the show, it's really a disappointment, even if they manage to finish it off at the end of the road. And I feel like that's a big problem that happens to characters like her either before or after, who we're going to talk about. Now, Tori or Kotori is considered the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Female protagonist, and while I definitely agree that in terms of a story and character perspective, she's the weakest, I don't actually hate her. The main problem with Tori is that even though she doesn't duel, she just gets overshadowed by everyone else in the role. Kite has more experience when it comes to the numbers. Caswell and Flip are more intelligent and crafty, so she kind of loses her role as a smart guy pretty quickly. She has her dancing motifs, but that barely goes explored. And even against someone like Anna and Kathy, while they don't get that much to do in the storyline, they do stand out as more fleshed out characters with their own distinct personalities and goals. Even if all 3 of them are in love with Yuma, it feels like they actually do complement Yuma more as a character. That being said, I am going to give Tori her flowers. She has had Yuma's back from the very start of the show and never turned on him even once. She was the one who got him out of his funk when he lost Astral and then Shark the first time. Then, later on, during season 4, when Vector basically was about to send all the Numbers Club into a black hole, she's the one who talked Yuma out of his depression during the Dark Zexo moment and actually steered the spaceship into actually avoiding the black hole altogether. So I am going to give Tori her props there. But it is a way she never got to do anything more. Like, yeah, it's awesome that she's the first person to canonically confess her crush to the main character on screen and it being reciprocated. But I feel like there's a lot more you could have done with her in the story perspective. Like, a lot of people thought, based on the green hair, that she may have secretly been Mr. Heartland's daughter, but never recognized the extent of her crimes, and she would have to confront him about that one day. Then there's the fact that we don't really have that many representatives for Zexo outside of Yuma and Astral using the power. So having Tori meet up with someone from Astral World and find a way to purify the numbers so that other people can use them, that could have been a good role for her, even if she doesn't duel that much. And I feel like even though she doesn't duel all that much and lost almost all her duels, I think there should have been like one small episode where she teamed up with Yuma, and even if he did the work, her belief in her ended up with her actually giving dueling another shot and actually winning alongside him. Duel Links, she actually dueled Kite because she wanted to improve her dueling skills so that she could actually be able to help Yuma out one day in an actual duel. In fact, I don't hate any of the 8 female lead characters that we have. I just wish some of them got better treatment. I don't hate any of the shunned halfway through the series. Speaking of being shunned halfway through the series, Yuzu. To make a long story short, Yuzu felt like they were trying to treat her as a dragoness to the point where they were actually giving her more spotlight than Yuma at a time. And then both of their paths would converge eventually at the midpoint as they try to solve the mystery together. The problem was, after the Yuri duel, which some people claim was the downfall of her character, I don't entirely agree. Because the issue with the Synchro arc is that too many times the characters were split up, so they never had the time to interact with one another. And granted, Yuzu had a really great duel in the Synchro arc where she got to prove herself as an entertainment duelist by really giving a good back and forth between Chojuro and ultimately winning. But then after she loses to Sergei, which she gets blown out of an entire lane, she ends up getting saved by Sora, and it's really cute to see that their connection was part of the reason Sora was convinced to turn sides, even though another issue is that Sora kind of just showed up and we didn't get to see his perspective and what led him to do so. But after that, she gets kidnapped, and then by season 3, she gets to meet up with Alexis and Yusho, but she doesn't get any duel. And the worst part is we never get to see her use any Synchro or Xyz monsters, despite being in one of those dimensions and having ties and relationships with some of the Xyz members because they confuse her for Yuri. She gets kidnapped for a vast majority of Arc 5, ends up in a tube, never gets to duel, and she's the only one of the Bracelet girls that ends up surviving at the end of the series, because all of her counterparts are living inside of her. And while I don't even hate Arc 5 or hate the ending that much, I just wish that she actually got to, fight Zark, work with Ray or communicate with Ray, show Yuya that she could find a way to free the other Bracelet girls and have all of them live happy, normal lives. But it's really a shame that Yuzu was so close to being one of the best female characters, and she ended up just being pretty much a disappointment. No fault of her own, of course. Now, Blue Angel / Oi is also in a similar vein to Yuzu in that she had a lot of great build-up, and her design is really cool, but her development was kind of mishandled by the fact that she lost so much, and not for the reasons you think. See, Aoi has this great character arc about the fact that in Vrains, she feels like a fully fleshed out person who enjoys life and is free, but in the real world, she's lonely, depressed, has next to no friends, and everyone who tries to get close to her, except for the Duel Club, just tries to use her for stuff. Which is a pretty sad realization, and when you go into Vrains and she decides to try and target Playmaker because it'll probably appease her brother, only to get manipulated by a Spectre and end up falling into a coma, you really feel bad for her. And the aftermath where Yusaku ends up finding her in the real world and saving her, both Yusaku and Akira have to go to Vrains to find a way to get the vaccine from Revolver. And then Akira is so paranoid that he literally keeps her trapped inside of their house for safekeeping. The fact that she wants to go out and immediately try to help Playmaker as thanks for what she did, well, what he did, is really admirable, and it shows that she had a really good learning curve to try and get better and not be so reliant on other people. Like, the duel against the prototypes isn't nothing much, but it does show that she's able to prove herself. And during the deleted / another arc, she's able to confront one of the people who spread the virus, Envira, and actually appeal to her, and that there's probably a better way to resolve all this conflict than needlessly dragging innocent lives, and proves to her in the duel that she can prove herself and ultimately wins, earning Vira's respect. And in fact, in the next couple of episodes, Go, her, and Yusaku agree to team up and try to save Link Vrains, especially when Revolver basically has this new plan. And you would think this would give her the ultimate way to conclude her Season 1 arc, especially since Spectre was the one who infected her in the first place. But they needed to hype up how strong Spectre was as an opponent, which they really could have done without ruining Aoi's character arc. Because typically in Yu-Gi-Oh!, when you want to hype up a villain or hero, you basically put them against an established character who was shown to be pretty strong, so that the next person who beats them gets to show either how strong they are or how far they've come as a character. Now, you would think that the show would have Spectre duel somebody else, because after Aoi gets defeated, Akira gets trapped in a cage, and when Yusaku duels Spectre, Spectre basically uses Akira as a hostage, but Akira ends up telling Yusaku that he believes in him and literally let himself get deleted in order for Yusaku to continue dueling and finishing Spectre off. What the show could have and should have done instead was have Spectre's first duel after Kitamura be against Akira, so it actually makes sense that he has Akira trapped up in those thorns, and then have Aoi duel Spectre so that she could complete her character arc by defeating the same person who's responsible for putting her inside of a coma that's basically going to do the same thing to the entire world if the Tower of Hanoi gets completed. That way, when Spectre uses Akira as a hostage, because Akira is her brother, when he sacrifices himself by touching the thorns, it would actually show that he believes in her, giving her the motivation to finish Spectre off, earning her character arc, and then being able to watch as Yusaku finishes off Revolver, proving that Yusaku does not need to just face off all these conflicts alone. But just like Alexis, she doesn't get the opportunity to prove herself to her brother when it really would have been a great opportunity for the show to take advantage of that. And while I don't hate her Season 2 duels, the fact that the only time she wins a duel is when she's pitted up against someone that the main villain says, hey, you are weaker than Blue Maiden, so you are basically just going to stall for time. Because ignoring the fact that she only wins one duel in Season 2, when you look at every single duel that she has throughout this entire arc, it's very much a mixed bag in terms of how the writers treat her. Like, against Soul Burner, she does pretty well. She's getting hyped up for having this Blue Girl transformation after basically being under Emma's wing for a fair bit of time. But she loses and gets thrown into a cliff for no reason. And the only reason the duel happened is because Wendy said he didn't trust other humans. So they had Soul Burner fight her so that they could get her out of the way. When Soul Burner and Playmaker could have just easily told them about the circumstances, had them wait it out, or just have the bounty hunters go and attack them, so Blue Girl could hold them off and get her first win in the series, since she and Go never got to duel. And the bounty hunters basically use his old deck, so it would basically just be a mock Blue Girl versus Go duel, where she would get a chance to shine in her first duel without losing for the new arc. And the scene where she eventually learns that Miyu was a member of the Lost Incident and decides to work with Aqua to help free her and get her memory back really was a good moment. But it really would have hit better had she had a duel to cement her and Aqua's partnership. Because her dueling Blood Shepherd would be pretty interesting, because Blood Shepherd had just defeated Ghost Girl, and Ghost Girl was her mentor. So for Blue Maiden to surpass her mentor and end up beating someone that even she couldn't beat would be pretty cool to watch in its own right and continue her arc as Blue Maiden. In fact, had the show used Haru more in the beginning of Season 2, like giving him duels against Akira, members of Soul, and Go, they could have hyped up him being such a threat that no one else was expecting, so when Blue Maiden defeats him, it actually feels earned instead of just giving her a cheap victory against an opponent who didn't really get that much screen time and was kind of robbed just like her. And I really do like her duel with Bowman because it shows how far she's come. Bowman actually treats her with better respect than the writers have done at certain points. And even though she loses, she really duels her heart out until she has no other choice because Bowman's deck is just that broken. And while I would have preferred the final duel be a 3v1 between Bowman versus Playmaker, her, and Soulburner, and she and Soulburner take the L but still contribute enough to help Yusaku finish off Bowman, I still can't be mad at how she ended season 2, but the road to get there was definitely a mistreatment of her character. Then season 3 happens, and for every positive, there's a negative. Like, she gets to reunite with Miyu, but it's barely only just 10 to 20 seconds. She gets a really good moment where she talks to Yusaku after finding out about his identity, and I basically turning against humanity and her promising to help fight him if Yusaku won't join in, and wanting to thank him for everything he's done for her. And she gets to team up with her brother against Ai, and even if they lose, she ends up surviving, which means she has the potential to have another duel to finally complete her character arc, and give her a ceremonial duel like how Playmaker, Soulburner, and Revolver all got theirs against their respective opponents, right? Well, no. Reigns did lose 20 episodes, so we don't know how much content they could have included given the time space. But the fact that she's one of the only 4 survivors from the incident, and she gets no final duel for herself, is just really disappointing. They killed off Spectre even though his actor was available, and she could have had a rematch against him to conclude everything and move on and prove that she could survive without her brother in the world, but they don't do that. Because while the show jokes that she did nothing and people have mocked that line to death, in essence, when you think about it, she did a lot in her own series. She was slowly getting over her depression. She was making friends. She was able to get back her friend. She was able to bring Playmaker back to get into the fight. And her relationship with her brother improved. The problem is she barely got any wins to complete that arc and make it feel satisfying. So while Blue Girl's not the worst female character that was treated here, she definitely could have been better, or at least top 2 or 3. And before I talk about Roman, one thing that really feels weird is that up until Blue Angel, debatably, and maybe Akiza, almost none of the decks really reflect the characters all that well. Like, Alexis being considered a queen doesn't really have anything to do with cybernetic angels. Akiza definitely has something with plants and roses, given that roses are sharp, dangerous, but also pretty beautiful, which reflects her character in a nutshell, though the design could have helped with that a little bit more. And while Tori is a cheerleader in the narrative, she's not really a cheerleader in terms of her goals and aspirations. And while Yuzu has a lot of dress-themed musicians, she's not exactly a musician herself. Like, at least Blue Angel, you could use the idol motif as the fact that she sees herself as an angel, so she has idols to help support and boost her up. And when she gets this Marincess, it's because she's working with the Aqua Ignis. Well, Water Ignis Aqua. But the point still stands. But the hatred Roman was getting from people who didn't even watch her show says a lot, because she's arguably the best female protagonist in terms of both treatment and character developments. Like, in terms of the deck suiting the character, she has arguably the best one. She wants to be a musician because she was inspired by her idol, and her idol ended up handing her a card, which got her into dueling reluctantly. And even though she wasn't interested in it at first, because of her duels with Yuga and later Rose manipulation, she eventually found her path to becoming a duelist who decided to use that in order to bolster herself and become a better musician, so that one day she could basically meet her idol on stage and both duel and perform alongside her. And the great thing about her character is they don't sideline this at all. It's the forefront of her character, and it continues to be an interesting aspect of her personality. The fact that she wasn't interested in dueling at first, but slowly gets interested in it over time, ends up both helping and harming her character, because in terms of harming, it ends up hurting her relationships with her friends because she was basically used by Roa as a spy, but even she turns against him because she ends up finding out that thanks to Yu-Gi-Oh!, she ends up valuing the respect and kindness that her friends have shown her when no one else has. Like, she defeats Gakuto partially because her hunger ended up kicking her in to perform better. But when she has to prove herself to get to the Garden of Providence against Arata, instead of letting it be consumed by hunger, being angry that he ended up cheating, she gave herself the courage and confidence to fight back and prove herself to her friends in order to help them advance in their goal. It's showing that even though she did have a rocky start, she is willing and continuing to improve herself as both a duelist and as someone who hurt people that she cared about. Because she keeps the dual guitar that Yuga gave her as a gift and continues to use it as her form of dueling. And it's really good expression of her character, given how much she starts jamming whenever she gets into the mood, or is really willing to give a duel her all. Like when Yuga ends up being depressed and Luke, and Gakuto all agree to settle their differences to go and find Otis and dueling him to see if he can help them find a way to help him defeat Nail. And she ends up contributing because the Maximum card ends up using her ID card, which the Roman at the beginning of the series would have never done. But because she and Yuga and the rest of the crew have bonded so much, it feels so much believable that her growth has resulted in them being able to continue dueling and helping their ideals grow for the future to come. And while the Tsuchiko duel was fun in the sense of GX, where you could just have random duels for whatever reason you want, and that they were arguing over a TV remote, it was cute and consistent with her character that she wanted to watch Princess G perform and ended up losing because she relied on her hangry state too much instead of actually believing in her own strength and using it more consistently. And while there is a valid criticism to be had in the fact that she probably could have used another duel before she dueled Yuga and defeated him, because she needed to be in a duel where she kept flip-flopping between her hangry and normal state, questioning whether or not she could duel without the interference of others or just being angry. Having her duel be motivated by her idol being forced to retire based on her interest in trying something new that the government is trying to suppress really gives her a chance to be introspective and recognize that to pursue her dreams, even if she has to fight against the world, she needs to do so, because if her idol did the same thing, she could do so as well and forge her own path, which ultimately concludes in her not relying on her angry state anymore and beating Yuga in a really fun back and forth duel, which I don't understand people getting mad about when there's no life or stakes death about it. I thought people wanted more Yu-Gi-Oh! Seasons where the characters just get to have fun dueling and progress their characters without everything just being a life or death situation. She even gets to duel Roa at the end of Arc 4, and given that he's the one who trained her, not only has she had more time to decide on how she's willing to improve as a person compared to him, she ultimately ends up defeating her and proving to Princess G that she's going to continue on her path until they manage to reunite on stage one day, which is a really good way to end her arc in Season 1. And yes, I know the complaints people have and that Roa should have won that duel, but I think the actual problem is that Roa earning the respect of his boyfriends should have happened the episodes before, where he should have dueled Kaizo instead of Luke. And while Season 2 is a little bit rocky for her because she loses against Yuka and then has a duel against Mimi that's mostly pointless or just to have fun, when was the last time you could actually think of a time where Yu-Gi-Oh! Female character that was in the main cast got to have a hobby and just enjoy herself? Because we see Roman's good at baseball, which is why Yuka wanted to recruit her. And while she's bad at cooking, she continues to try and get better at it, despite the fact that it mostly results in gags or things nearly blowing up. Which even ends up playing a role in the finale, where she ends up using a rocket made out of curry in order to blast them into space when the entire city's power grid is run out. And it's really ridiculous, but it's through characterization, which is what we should want from Yu-Gi-Oh! Instead of just a female character doing something and then losing and dying. And next to Akiza, she's the only one to basically get her own ceremonial duel towards the end of the show, where she proves to Princess G that in a world where she has to make a tough choice between both rush dueling and advancing her music career, she's going to choose both. And the fact that she basically ends up deciding the same way to fusion summon her ultimate monster, but ends up creating an entirely new monster out of it and defeating Princess G with it. And people like to go, Aoi is better than Roman because Aoi had a harder caliber of characters to duel against. And while I can't argue against that, I don't understand why we're comparing over who got harder duels versus who got the duels that they needed to finalize and assess how far they've come as a character, and how did those duels either support that or undermine it. And I feel like that's where Roman excels over Aoi. Like, I want to say it's disappointing that people took a look at Roman and said that, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh characters haven't evolved, they've regressed. But considering that she's one of only 3 characters in this photo who's not wearing a school uniform, that's really saying a lot. Given that she has more personality and a chance to explore her character more than almost every single girl in this photo. But hey, Yu-Gi-Oh! Sevens was also about learning and inspiring from others in order to grow your own road. But some people will always just build obstacles instead of giving new things a chance. And finally, with Yuamu, while Yuamu definitely has some problems in terms of the show not giving her a consistent character arc or goal to aspire to until towards the end, I will say she does keep up the trend of having her own unique personality, quirks, and flaws. She's been able to prove herself in duels. It's finally nice that the female character is considered the smart one in the group when every other female character has mostly either just been the girl or just one with a lot of baggage or being the heart of the team. We actually have entire episodes of Yuamu using her intelligence to get her way out of situations and seeing her thought process throughout in both duels and in terms of the plots. And even in episodes where she's not dueling, she always finds some way to contribute to the plot in some aspects. Like when she uncovered the fact that half the Rovian bandits were sneaking into her home in order to try and steal the spaceship that they've been searching for the whole time. Or when she loses to the Ryugu brothers, but she ends up working with both her brother and her ancestor to try and figure out how to help Udius defeat both of them by creating their own maximum using their souls as a conduit. Then in Arc 6, where in between when she gets brainwashed, she and Yui have a heart-to-heart over the fear that she's feeling and the fact that she might not be able to control herself. And even in the final arc where she makes a very controversial decision, but one that she ultimately decides to stick with to her guns even in the final moments. And the fact that season 3 is only happening because she's one of the only female characters to participate in the final duel of an arc really shows that even if I disagree with some of the choices the writers have made with her character, at the very least, they are attempting and making efforts to do something with their female characters instead of just making them damsels, useless, or ignoring them for the second half of the story. So yeah, do I think the female characters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have evolved? Well, in different ways, yes. Gallop has had a notorious history for how they've treated their female characters. And while I know people don't want to give Bridge a chance because of the art style changes in direction, I have to give Bridge a lot of credit, and so should a lot of people, because not only have they tried to make their female characters a lot more unique in terms of both clothing, variety, and how much they contribute to the plot, but also in that they're trying to do unique things with the characterization and not just leaving them as one note or losing any traces of personality that they started out with. And I'm not going to dismiss the effort by the past writers who did make an attempt to do something with Taya, Alexis, Akiza, Katori, Yuzu, and Aoi. Because there are clearly writers in the production of these shows that want to do something with these characters, but either do executive meddling, just a dismissal of using what they have, or wasting good opportunities. It's a shame that some of them never got to live their full potential. Well, at least with this new era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, I can safely say the evolution does look like we are improving in terms of treating our female characters with a lot more respect. So, let me know what you think. Do you think I have a point in the evolution of female leads of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime? Do you think I'm wrong in that all the original Yu-Gi-Oh! girls were treated very well? Have you given Sevens and Go Rush a chance and actually like what you saw? Or have you disliked what you saw and think that they're even worse than the Gallop girls? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you have a bizarre but fun and interesting day.